Hi, I'm Jamsi. I'm a business professor, and welcome to my discussion on project management, chapter 2, organization strategy and project selection. So from last meeting, we discussed the importance of project management, the different aspects of project management, the steps, and why we have to manage our projects. So for this particular chapter, we're gonna focus on organization strategy and project selection. Now, how does that work for us? So in this particular chart, we are finished with the introduction and we move on forward to the strategy. So here are just some of our learning objectives for today. So for today, we're gonna learn why project managers need to understand strategy, the strategic management process, and the need for a project priority system, as well as project classification. So let's get right to it. So in the olden days, the burden of formulating a strategy fell in the hands of senior management. But that is now old school thinking. New school thinking tells us that everyone in the organization need to understand the corporate strategy, especially the functional managers, or in our case, the project managers. Why is that the case? First, because there is a need for the project managers to make informed decisions and make appropriate adjustments to previously arrived at decisions. So, in some cases, a decision has already been reached regarding a project, but due to unforeseen circumstances, we may need to respond to an emergency or we need to pivot. And in order for us to be able to do that, we must be able to take into consideration the overall strategy of the firm. So, number one question to ask about learning the corporate strategy for project manager is, how should we respond to changes in a product design or to delays? And the way we respond to these sorts of things will depend on the corporate strategy. So let's say, for example, if the project is a priority for the company, or if the project will be incurring any penalties in case of a delay. Therefore, the project manager will respond by allowing people to work overtime to prevent such delays. And the deadlines will not be pushed back to prevent any penalties or any adverse effects because of the pushback. But if the time element is not as important as it should, if there is a delay, maybe there is no need to react on the delay. Maybe it would be better if we wait until the delay is done, and if we can afford it, Why not? Second, project managers need to understand strategy so that they can be effective project advocates. And in order to do that, they have to be able to first demonstrate to senior management how their project contributes to the firm's mission in order to garner their continued support. So, of course, they have to show the valuability of this project and how it should align with the corporate mission and vision. Because if it no longer serves the purpose and it no longer fits in the puzzle, there is a high chance that management would pull out its support or funding on a specific project. So the project managers also have to understand strategy so that they are able to explain to stakeholders why certain project objectives and priorities are critical in order to secure buy-in on contentious trade-off decisions. So what happens here? There are multiple projects in the pipeline. Some believe that a project should come first and another project should come later. But as an effective project manager, we should be able to explain why these projects were put in this sequence and why are these projects critical and why should they be executed now more than ever. So if in case there are protests from stakeholders, they would be able to explain this clearly to convince them to support the trade-off decision if it needs to be made. And lastly, project managers need to understand strategy in order for them to explain why the project is important, to motivate and empower the project team. So in management, part of the leading aspect is to motivate the employees to work for you, to work with you, and to work on the project. If the employees do not understand the importance and or the significance of a specific project, they might not be enticed to work on it. Or if they see that the project that they're working on is of little significance to the company, then they might not be as productive or as motivated as we want them to be. So those are the two reasons why project managers need to understand strategy. All right. So to recap, strategy is no longer a matter for discussion for just senior management. It should be a matter that is discussed to functional managers and should be cascaded to everyone in the organization. Next up, here's the strategic management process. So let's backtrack a little bit to Strama. What is strategic management? So strategic management is the process of assessing what we are and deciding and implementing what we intend to be and how we're going to get there. So having a strategy is like having a map because it is rather a continuous iterative process aimed at developing an integrated and coordinated long-term plan of action. So strategic management definitely does not stop because it involves performing a chain of actions and resulting it towards, or aligning it rather, towards a determined mission and vision statement. So strategic management also requires strong links among mission, goals, objectives, strategy, and implementation. So, in our strategic management class, we are taught on how to use our resources and determine a way forward according to the corporate mission and vision. So here are two dimensions of strategic management. So first, strategic management responds to changes in the external environment and allocates the firm's scarce resources to improve its competitive position. That's right. Because in order for us to be competent and competitive, we must be agile enough to pivot and respond to changes that are happening not just within our control, but also within the external environment. And given these changes, we must also take a look at it and see it from a standpoint that each company, no matter how deep its pockets are, have limited resources. And as part of the game in which all businesses compete, we must be able to allocate these resources to improve a specific competitive position. So it depends on what the company's plan is. We always ask ourselves in strategic management, ano ba talaga gusto nating mangyari? Second, strategic management is the internal response to new action programs aimed at enhancing the competitive position of the firm. So we have a goal, but we need a plan on how to make that goal happen. And project management is vital in that regard, as each of the projects that are being implemented by the firm is a step closer towards that goal. It's like when you're studying. So in our case, we are accounting students. So our courses are specifically designed to help us learn accounting concepts. And what's the end goal? For each and every one of us to become CPAs, CMAs, or CISA certified. Now, for us to be able to do this, we must be able to develop a strategy. And part of that strategy is, of course, giving us the basic accounting subjects in the first year of accounting, matching it with the right teachers, and complementing it with the correct or with the best textbooks there is. A second layer of strategy could be, apart from that, is the way we study. So when we study accounting courses, what do we do? What is our strategy? Some people would write their notes in many different colored pens. So they would use a black pen for the title. For words that they want to be emphasized, they would use a red pen. And for the rest of the text, they might be using a blue pen. In some cases, they would use highlighters to highlight and remember the important points about a topic, which was something that worked for me. But for some of my friends, what they would do is they would develop mnemonics, and to help them remember the mnemonics, they would sing it to the tune of their favorite song so that they could remember everything. So that's a studying technique that could help us get to the finish line. So strategic management is the internal response of the firm, and it shows that the firm is committed to enhancing its competitive position, because each of these projects that the firm implements is a piece of the bigger puzzle. And every time the firm completes a project, then they are closer to completing the bigger picture. All right. So here are the 4 main activities of the strategic management process. Now, what are these? Number 1, we need to review and define the organizational mission. So as discussed in our strama, everything begins with the corporate mission vision statement. From the mission and vision statement, we are able to formulate strategies. So based on these strategies that we have formulated, we are able to set the different goals and objectives, or the different steps, in order for us to be able to implement the strategies. All right, so let's go through them one by one fairly quickly. First, reviewing and defining the organizational mission involves asking ourselves what we want to become, as these mission statements identify the scope of the organization in terms of its products and services. Once we revisited our mission and vision, we then therefore analyze and formulate strategies. So when it comes to analyzing and formulating strategies, we answer the question of what needs to be done to reach the mission. Strategy formulation includes determining and evaluating alternatives that support the organization's objectives and selecting the best alternative. So when we say analyzing and formulating strategies, we will be developing multiple methods in achieving the organizational mission. But it doesn't mean that we're going to be trying all of those 4. We will be evaluating all of those 4 and see which one of them is the best. And of course, implement the best later on. The third activity in the strategic management process is the setting of objectives. So, objectives translate the organization's strategy into specific, concrete, and measurable terms, or otherwise, your SMART goals. Objectives answer in detail where a firm is headed and when it is going to get there. So, if your organizational mission is a dream and your strategies are your options, the objectives become your roadmap towards reaching that dream. And when are you able to reach for that star? And lastly, number 4, we implement our strategies through projects. So the implementation phase answers the question of how these particular strategies will be realized given the available resources. So, because we already have a roadmap, now we get to decide how do we go about following the roadmap. Do we take a car? Do we take a plane? Do we drive? And how do we even get to the destination given that we have limited resources? Is it through the help of a friend? Is it through working your way through? Or are you saving for that first before you actually go ahead and implement that particular project? So if you take a look at this chart, this is what we have discussed so far. So what are we now is the first activity of strategic management. It all starts with the review of the mission and vision. Take note, it says here, review and revise. So meaning we review regularly and we revise accordingly. So according to what? According to the internal and external environments, meaning we have to understand our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's why we always do industry analysis and conduct our SWOT analysis and align it with the company's mission, vision, and core values. So after we understand what we have, what we're good at, what opportunities are there for us, what are the threats, and what are we needing to work on, we then have to set out our strategy and objective and choose among a portfolio of strategic choices so that we answer what we intend to be. And once that's clear, that's when we start implementing the strategy through proper project selection and implementation of projects so that we get to our main destination. So I hope that's clear. And this is what I was saying earlier. So the goal has to be SMART. It has to be S, specific, meaning it must be specific in targeting an objective. It should be explicitly stating an objective. M is measurable. So once you have that objective in mind, we need to answer, how do we measure the success or the failure or the progress that we have on that specific goal? A, assignable or attainable. Make the objective assignable to one person for completion, meaning it has to be something that we should be able to do. And in our case, it should be something that can be delegated to one person for completion. R, realistic. Is your objective reasonable given given the resources rather that you have and time? And of course, your goal has to be time bound. We have to state the objective clearly and when it can be achieved. So that is the SMART goals. So now that we're clear on the relationship between strategic management and project management, let's move forward to the next topic, which is the project priority system. So in selecting a project, we can't help but think about which project has to be implemented first. And most times, the process of selecting a project doesn't really make a lot of sense because a priority project for one department may not be a priority project for the others. It could also be influenced by the proponent of the project. If the project proponent has strings to pull with the top management and is able to convince them, then regardless of how low in the list of priorities that specific project is, it could be bumped up from the list. So when we implement projects without a priority system, then there's going to be some problems. So what are those problems? There are three main problems. The first one is implementation gap. The implementation gap is the lack of understanding and consensus of organizational strategy among top and middle managers. So, for short, hindi nag-usap yung dalawang management levels. So, the senior management rather, is completely on a different page than the middle level managers. That's why it is important that everyone understands the corporate strategy to prevent this kind of gap so that everyone is on board and on the same page. They must be in tune with one another so that there is no confusion between priorities. So, dapat mag-usap yung dalawa. Second, of course, organizational politics. So, project selection, like I said, could be subjective. And it could be influenced by persuasive and powerful people that are backing the projects. And oftentimes, there is this one specific project that the powerful individual is advocating, and it's called the sacred cow. So, ito yung prized possession ng project proponent that he is actually advocating. And because he is an advocate of this particular project and he has the power to pull some strings, he will be using that advantage to advocate for the project and have it implemented even if it's not on the list of priorities or if based on the initial research, medyo tsaka siya. The proponent would have to disregard the findings for that specific project and push forward with it still. The last problem is the conflict of resources and multitasking. So we could easily apply this to our individual lives. They said that multitasking enables us to do multiple things at once and trapping us into thinking that we're more productive. But no, multitasking actually gets us to a difficult position where our concentration is divided, our resources are divided, and most times we are actually doing more bad than good when we multitask. So, mas madalas tayong nagkakamali on one thing if we multitask because we do not have the focus. The same thing happens in an organization. A multi-project environment creates the problems of project interdependency and the need to share the resources. So like what we have mentioned earlier, in as much as the company or the firm will have deep pockets, there will come a time when resources need to be shared. And there is now a question of, wait, who gets to use this resource first? And if we cannot clearly establish this particular order, then it goes automatically to sharing the resources. And resource sharing leads to multitasking. And it involves starting and stopping work on one task to go and work on another project and then going back to the work on the original task given to you. So even as employees, we're trapped into thinking that we're more productive when we multitask. But at the end of the day, you will realize that it's better to focus on one thing first and get that done before moving on to a different task. So here we have the benefits of portfolio management. Why do we need to do this? Because it builds discipline into the project selection process. Second, it links project selection to the strategic metrics as established by the organization. Third, it prioritizes project proposals across a common set of criteria rather than on politics or emotion, meaning it rationalizes the project selection process and allocates resources to projects that align with strategic direction. Again, we eliminate the proponent that advocates for, as they say, the sacred cow. Next is that project portfolio management better balances risk across all projects. Second to the last reason is that it justifies killing or parking projects that do not support organization strategy. So what's the point of implementing the project if it does not lead you closer to your end goal? And lastly, when we manage the portfolio, it improves communication and supports agreement on project goals because you actually coordinate with the other people who are implementing other projects that may be related to what you're holding on to or what you're working on as of the moment. So, to end the first half of our discussion, we have these typical project classifications. So in project management, there are three common types of projects. First is compliance or the must-do projects, or these are also called the emergency projects. So if your project falls under this, there is no escaping these projects because if you don't comply with these projects, then there will be catastrophic consequences such as penalties and losses that the company would not want to experience or even incur. Second, operational projects. Now, these projects support the day-to-day operations of the firm. So, what are these operational projects? Probably this is to streamline a process or to set forth a document checklist in order for the accounting unit to get you paid faster. That could be considered as an organizational project. Last but not the least is what we call the strategic projects, or these are the projects that are key towards reaching the organization's goal. So these are the special projects. Probably this could be the deals that you strike up with future business partners or vendors for a specific deal, or closing a licensing deal for a product that you're about to release in order for you to be probably the cost leader or the leading differentiator or disruptor in your industry. So those kinds of projects are the shining stars of the organization. Now, that ends the first half of our discussion on organizational strategy and project selection. So there's still a second half of the video, and I would like you to stay tuned for that. Until then, bye.